Kennywood has a lot of historical remnants, a lot you didn't even know existed. Learn more about such historical remnants in this video, as I will be uncovering 30 of them. And yes, there's 30, and probably hundreds of more throughout the entire park. So let's get right into it. You just arrived at Kennywood Park, and it's time to enter the park. Well, not so fast. I know you're excited to get in there and ride, but before you even enter the park, there's a remnant of an old ride. Not necessarily a ride, but this is a way you could get to the park easily from the upper levels. More specifically, the third level parking lot. I present to you Kenny's Parkway, which opened in 1996 and brought the guests down from the third level down to the entrance without having to walk all the way down there. It was removed after the 2020 season and was rarely ever used in the last 10 years. So they removed it, and that little spot where you got off right here, it's still there to this day, obviously without the lift. So if you're ever at season pass processing, look to your left and you'll see the old spot where you used to get off the lift. And with that being said, it is now time to actually go into the park. And the next remnant is about the tunnel. Although it is still here, the original tunnel is still there also. And the original tunnel was very short. It wasn't as long as the current tunnel is. The tunnel was extended whenever Kennywood Boulevard, right above it, was extended to 4 lanes. So the solution was to make the tunnel longer, which explains the weird elevations in the tunnel. So if you're wondering where the original tunnel is, it's the closest to the end of the current tunnel where it's the most flattest, which would be right about here. And make sure you hit the ceiling before we move on. Okay, now that we're in the actual park, there's a lot to talk about. Firstly, let's talk about the Goodnight Heart. Did you know it didn't always hang over the tunnel? It was actually in another place of the park before it went over the tunnel. It was originally over the lost Kennywood entrance when it first opened in 1995. But at some point during the late 90s and the early 2000s, Kennywood moved the heart to over the tunnel, and that's where it's been ever since. Did you really think I was done talking about the heart? Well, you're wrong. There's more to it than just that. Now this picture is a bit dated, but do you see that white railing behind the heart? Well, what if I told you that was from Turnpike? Turnpike had white railings all across the track. And whenever they got rid of the ride in 2009 for Skyrocket, they left this singular railing here because it held the Goodnight Heart up. And I know how much you want to go to Old Mill, but not so fast. There's another Turnpike remnant under Skyrocket. Along this pathway actually was the old Turnpike's entrance. So Turnpike would have been right there. There actually are gates over there of where you used to enter and exit for Turnpike. Turnpike used to be where Skyrocket is now. This gate actually right here is where you would have entered or exited the ride. And there are also streetlights that are left over from Turnpike, which you can see in this photo, right there and there. And they go all down that pathway. You can see it when riding Skyrocket. Now if that's pretty cool, look behind you on that very same pathway. You see that to the right? Looks familiar, doesn't it? Well, what if I told you that's Old Mill's old paddle wheel, and a new one has since took its place since 1998, which was 6 years before Garfield's Nightmare became a thing. So now let's actually get into Old Mill. When you ride along the new 2020 Old Mill, you'll see a lot of remnants of old Kennywood rides from many of their old dark rides also. Some of the props were reused from Garfield's Nightmare, some from Gold Rusher, and many old past Kennywood dark rides. The most notable one that's been reused is the train from Gold Rusher, which when you pass it, it makes noises and lights up, just as it did in the 80s. The Old Mill used to also have outdoor scenes, and some of them, if you look closely, you can see them. A few of them still exist and were not removed. They were just covered up. You can see some portions of the outdoor scenes from the Jackrabbit pavilions. Okay, that's enough with Old Mill. Let's make a right and let's go into the Penny Arcade. This is Laughin' Sal. Did you know she was actually from an old ride? She was from the park's old ride, Laugh in the Dark. That would have been to the right of Old Mill, and she would have been right outside the ride, just non-stop laughing. She's been laughing since the Great Depression. When the ride was removed in the 60s and replaced by Turnpike, Laughin' Sal was put into a storage bin, then eventually ended up being out front Old Kennywood Railroad, until 2018, when the park redid Old Kennywood Railroad into Journey with Thomas and the whole Thomastown section of the park. And now she's in the Penny Arcade, ever since. Moving on to Jackrabbit. You know those neon stars and moons that are on the ceiling of the station? Well, those were actually from the Dipper roller coaster. You can see the stars and moons right there. And when the ride was removed in 1984 for Raging Rapids, the stars and moons were relocated to the Jackrabbit in 1997. This isn't something about Jackrabbit, but it's right behind Jackrabbit. What might look like a hunk of junk to you was at one point a Kennywood ride. Now nobody is certain exactly what ride it is. People have been speculating this could be Volcano or Paratrooper, but if you want to look for it, when you're on Jackrabbit, the final turnaround, look to your right and down and you will see it. Now let's go to Racer. Did you know all the Racer arches are original from 1927? You can probably guess why the station shakes so much then. Don't worry, it's been shaking like that ever since they put it in. Now if you make your way over to Steelers Country, there's actually a log jammer boat right outside of Steelers Country's entrance. Since Kennywood was celebrating 125 years in 2023, they had it out, but typically they have it in the bushes under steel curtain. So if you want to spin the log jammer boat wheel, you know where to go. Before the End Zone Cafe became the End Zone Cafe, it used to be a pavilion. Good old Pavilion 23. And before it became that, it housed the Whip, until it was moved to Lost Kennywood in 1995, which the Lost Kennywood Whip ride originally had a roof too, until 2002, when there was a microburst, and the roof collapsed and killed somebody, so that is why the Whip does not have a roof anymore. If we keep going down this pathway we were earlier, to your right we have Aero 360. You'll notice these colored blocks in the line for the ride. What are they? Well, they're left over from Kennywood's early 2000s pre-boarding line section. It basically made it a little bit more organized when you were in line. Swing Shot and Black Widow also have this pre-boarding section that are rarely ever used. It's an idea Kennywood tried out in the early 2000s, but abandoned in the early 2010s. As for Aero 360's line itself, it was actually reused from Wonder Wheel, which opened in 1986 and was featured in the park's 1986 commercial, and its last year was 1999 before Aero 360 opened up in 2000. What looks like just a normal pathway in Kiddieland, there once was a tower ride here called Pounce Bounce. It opened in 2002 and was removed in 2020. If you look at the very beginning of this video here, you can see where the old ride used to be. It's that little black patch right there. If you go over to Little Phantom and you go towards where the old entrance used to be, by the way, the old entrance used to be right here, you see this little concrete circle in the middle of Little Phantom. That was once where the old parachute ride used to be. It was removed in 1996 for Little Phantom. Have you ever wondered what that junk is in Diesel Drivers in Thomastown? Well, first of all, it ain't junk. Secondly, it's scrap pieces from Phantom's Revenge and Logjammer. It's a great way to make use of scrap pieces. This is Swing Around. It opened in 1989. People compare the new for 2023 Spinvasion to this ride. They are extremely similar, and the ride used to go on top of the garden stage. It was removed in 2006, and there are some stuff left behind from it, like the entrance-exit path areas that would lead up to the ride's stairs. This is Johnny Rockets. But did you know 10 years ago this building was used as a refreshments pavilion? And actually, this pavilion was originally intended for the park's 1927 carousel. It once housed the park's 1899 carousel, so they tried to put their new carousel in, but then found it was too big, so they built a new pavilion right next door because the old one was too small. And that's where the carousel's been ever since. But what about that carousel garden that's right behind it? There's one horse on display there. Where's that from? It's actually from the park's old entrance sign, which was eventually replaced with the Kennywood arrow. This is Gift Ship in Area 412. Did you know it used to be the old guest services building prior to 2007? Well, it was. They converted it into a gift shop in 2007 whenever Cosmic Chaos nearby opened up, and it's been a gift shop ever since. Most recently, in 2023, it was renovated to fit the new style of Area 412. Behind where the current lockers are at Kennywood was once where the Barron Curve used to be. This whole little area here has been since taken over by the West Mifflin Police, and they're using it as their police substation now. You know that pond that's right in front of the cabanas? Well, that was once the pond for King Kahuna, a ride that used to be where the cabanas are now. These dragon heads that are on the pagoda building might just look like they're there just for detail, but they were actually from the old mill's old 1920 boats. They were placed on the building when the building was built in 1987, and they have been there ever since. The Wave Swinger was originally located where the Kennyville stage is today. This was prior to being moved in 1995 to Lost Kennywood, and that's where it's been since then. You see those red buildings under Phantom's Revenge? Those were actually there in the Laser Loop days. You can see them right there. And in the Steel Phantom days, one of them actually used to be a gift shop for the ride, which would have been this one right here. And for Steel Phantom, you used to exit through this little cave right here, and it would take you directly to the gift shop. That cave was left over from the mini golf course that used to be there in the 80s. It's pictured right here. And when you're walking on the bridge for Phantom, you can actually see some remnants of the old golf course if you look to your left, and the old Steel Phantom exit I was talking about earlier. But before you even get to that point of the line, you can see the blue Kennywood mural, which that was left over from the Laser Loop days also. What's left over from Laser Loop itself? Well, the footers of Laser Loop are actually reused for Steel Phantom and also Phantom's Revenge. The station itself was reused from Laser Loop, but it's not in the exact same location as it once was when it was the Laser Loop. The Laser Loop's old station was closer to Pirate more than Thunderbolt. They moved it for Steel Phantom in 1991, and then when they redid the ride in 2001 for Phantom's Revenge, the lift hill, station, and transfer track stayed the same. And from the top of the first drop to the top of the second drop was the same also until 2009 when they replaced the track. Otherwise, all of the Steel Phantom track has been replaced. And although the old Steel Phantom track and supports were removed, the footers were not, because in Kennywood's mindset, if it doesn't get in the way of anything new, they're not going to remove it. And there's one notable footer that hasn't been removed, and that is in the dead center of Phantom's Revenge's final turn. Don't see it? Well, it's right there. And this footer would have probably held up the vertical loop. True fact, the footers that went around Pitfall, those were actually uncovered when the construction of Black Widow started in 2012, 12 years after the ride closed, and had to be removed because they were in the way. Did you know where the current Phantom's Revenge's photo booth is now? There once was a ride called Rolloplane there. It opened along with Lost Kennywood in 1995, and it closed in the mid-2000s. You can see where the ride would have been, right behind the photo booth. And that is all the Kennywood remnants I'm going to be talking about in this video. That might be even a little more over 30 remnants. Where else do you learn 30 plus Kennywood remnants in one video in less than 12 minutes? Exactly. So if you learned something new in this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications. You're in the right place if you love Kennywood. Let me know in the comments down below how much you knew, or what the most surprising remnant for you was. There are tons of choices to pick from. And also, if you haven't already, go join our Discord server. You can find a link to it in the description down below. It is the place where you can talk about all things Kennywood. You won't regret joining. I'll see you guys in the next video, and remember, let's ride.